to another episode of Chris's Classic Cinema. I'm Chris Weyert.
And I'm Jayden.
So, we decided to do something really interesting for this Halloween. We're going to be doing with some horror comedies, and a lot of them are really unique.
They are, and they were a lot of fun to watch as well. Well, most of them anyways.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's going to be... Don't worry, don't expect any jump scares or anything like that.
No, these are not scary at all. None of them are.
Yeah. It's not like one of those slasher films you see nowadays.
Maybe next year we'll do that, but I'm working on it.
I wouldn't want to do that. I'm not a fan of those.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, let's get to work. So for our first film, we're going back to the 1940s with what was a really popular film duo that time. I mean, with other film duos at that time, I could think of were like, especially with comedic duos like Laurel and Hardy. There was all those Road 2 movies with Bing Crosby and Bob Hope.
Not to mention we're on the tail end of the Three Stooges if we want to talk not just duos but trios as well.
Yes, well, this
and
one...
and then of course the Marx Brothers.
Yes. We're dealing with Abbott and Costello. And we're dealing with what is considered like one of their most popular movies.
Mm-hmm.
Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. While working with delivery packages, two guys end up finding themselves facing three monsters in one go. Count Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, and even the Wolfman. But the thing is, Dracula wants one of the guys' brain to put into Frankenstein's monster.
Mm-hmm.
While the Wolfman is actually trying to help them, keep them from happening.
Right. That's actually one thing I wish that this movie would have done is provide additional context at the beginning of the film. Because this was apparently a direct sequel to another film that didn't have anything to do with Abbott and Costello, which is Wolfman Meets Frankenstein.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Or Wolfman Meets Dracula. I can't remember if it was Wolfman that meets Dracula or Frankenstein.
Yeah,
it was a direct sequel of that. It was supposed to be a carryover of that story. And I wish there was a little bit more lead up to it versus it's just a cold opening of this, I am Wolfman, this, I want them gone. Doesn't give an explanation of why.
Yeah, well, other than that, this is definitely not, this may have monsters in it, but it's definitely not scary.
No, I mean, back in the day it may have been considered scary, but it's not that scary at all by today's standards.
Yeah, I mean, especially you have Abbott and Costello with their constant shenanigans.
Yeah, a lot of bickering, a lot of the shenanigans. The one guy always not believing the other thing with the monsters and all that stuff. Not to mention Costello getting not one but two girls at one point and going, what do? I've got two girls. And it's like the 1940s and, Abbott calling Costello a bigamist. So, because of it, as a direct result of that.
Yeah, well, this was really unique.
It's a ride. It's a ride and a half, just as any early horror movie Universal film will be.
Yes, that is true. This is a Universal movie.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when it comes to Abbott and Costello, I mean, you can definitely tell the chemistry those two have.
Yeah, you would think so, but there are actually some interesting things going on behind the scene with Abbott and Costello. You see, this was kind of towards the latter half of their careers when they were starting to wane in popularity. And it turned out that once you dig in a little deeper, they actually didn't care for each other at all at the time. And they actually, even just to add a little bit more flavor text, they didn't actually like doing the movie.
Really?
No, this was 100% just a cash grab for Universal, because Universal was really struggling in the days after World War II. They were not doing good at all. They were on the verge of bankruptcy. They literally put all their eggs in one basket for this movie to be a cash grab, and thankfully it worked. But nowadays, if a Disney did that, or if another film studio did that, that probably wouldn't work too terribly well. It was just a cheap cash grab.
Yeah, but other than that, there's the other cast members too. I mean, you have the two girls, and
oh yes,
one of them is very seductive, and the other is more of an investigator.
Investigator, but also very seductive as well.
Yeah.
They were both at one point, like I said, fighting for Costello's attention.
And then you have Lon Chaney Jr. reprising his role of the Wolfman.
Mm. You also have a couple other reprisals too.
Like Bela Lugosi as Dracula again.
Yes, my favorite It's honestly my favorite Dracula.
It's like the
He is the Dracula.
The quintessential Count Dracula.
He is the Dracula.
I literally saw in Barnes & Noble a few months ago a graphic novel of Dracula, and it starred him.
Yeah. Not to mention, I think there's also reprisation of Frankenstein's monster as well, isn't there?
No, well, it's not Boris Karloff, that's for sure.
No, it was not.
But still, it's interesting seeing those three guys in a comedy movie.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. But make no mistake, there are some scary elements to it.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like Dracula always doing the hypnotizing and all that stuff, and you're looking right into his eyes.
Yeah, and what I find is kind of funny is that, you know, he does this hypnotization skill, right? And he has no trouble with most people. But with Costello, nothing. It takes several tries.
Yeah.
But that's part of the running joke in this movie, was that they wanted to use Costello's brain in Frankenstein's monster. Because they thought, oh, he'd be easier to command, more malleable. The brain's a little bit easier to manipulate.
Kind of ironic considering how
Yeah. But it turned out he was too simple-minded, and it almost worked against him.
Yeah. I mean, when it comes to that whole scene with him reading the sign about Dracula, and the coffin keeps opening and closing, and he keeps calling for help, and it's like the boy who cried wolf.
Honestly, if I saw a hand popping out of a coffin, you know what I would have done? Sat on it. I'm pretty sure there would have been some screaming, and it would have been mine. I would have sat on it. That would have been such a good gag. I wish they could have. I was like hoping, please sit on it. Please, just sit on it. No, sit on it. It'd be funny.
Yeah, but still, when it comes to the cast, I mean, they do a great job.
And not only that, but the set design was also stellar.
Oh yeah, definitely. Especially with the castle, it definitely has the old classic Gothic feel.
Well, you'd say that, but that gets a bit deeper than that, because they not only does it have that classic Gothic feel, it is the classic Gothic feel. It is the original set from the original Dracula.
Okay.
You have all the scientific equipment from the original Frankenstein movie 20 years prior, or 10 or 20 years prior, was the equipment.
Wow.
So they actually went full authentic with the set design, using the original props for Frankenstein's monster.
Yeah, and then there's also the makeup with Lon Chaney Jr. as the Wolfman.
Yeah, and in fact, it's interesting because it took almost an hour to put on the makeup, even though at the end of the day it was a glorified rubber mask.
Wow, an hour for all that.
Right, well, again, a lot of these actors are kind of waning in their latter years, so they had a lot of high standards.
I mean, when it comes to Lon Chaney Jr., I mean, he's the son of the original Phantom of the Opera.
Yeah.
But when it comes to now, there's also other characters too. Like, there's the guy in charge of the wax museum, and he's
so aggressive. Like, you take a pill or something, you know? Like, he was so aggressive throughout the whole movie, unreasonably so. But again, that was part of the comedic, one of the comedic tropes that they were trying to illustrate.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to also the music, I mean, that opening is the opening sequence is pretty cool, especially since it's animated.
Oh yeah, the animation sequence for Dracula transforming as well. Like, that blew my mind.
It's almost flawless.
I mean, you can tell that's pretty bad for today's standards, but back in the 40s, that looked darn good. I liked it. I liked the transformation scenes, especially since it didn't even list how they did it. I'm gonna assume they did a composite of it, and that's how they did it.
Yeah.
But I liked how they were able to animate and get him to match the pose. Like the amount of work and the amount of takes it must have taken to get Dracula to stand in just the right spot so that they can be able to comp in the animation just right.
That I can't argue with.
Because I remember that, like, Doctor Who had a similar problem where with animation sequences and transitional sequences, they did that. But they had to do many different takes, and they were long takes too, where the actors had to stand still for a very, very long time just so that everything was perfect.
Now let's talk about the comedy, because it's mainly not a lot of jokes, but it's mainly like slapstick and all that stuff.
Yeah, I agree. It's more of a slapstick than jokes. You know, and of course, Abbott and Costello were really versatile at doing a bit of slapstick, but also a bit of like some really good one-liners and also more elaborate jokes as well. Like the duo were one of the most versatile comedic duos of the time.
Yeah, when it comes to like slapstick, in my opinion, they're not like up there with like Laurel and Hardy.
No, it's not. It's not going to be as extreme as like Three Stooges or anything like that. It's more like light slapstick. You know, there's a little bit of light slapstick going on. I think the most slapstick sequence in the entire movie is a tie between the rotary door sequence.
Oh yeah.
Or when Costello was all the way on top of all the luggage and just teetering.
Oh yeah.
That's probably those were like the most slapstick scenes in the whole movie.
Yeah.
But most of it was situational. A lot of the slapstick comedy in the movie was more situational than anything.
And yeah, when it comes to this movie, it's definitely one of those movies that you should definitely see like around Halloween.
Yeah, and you know.
I mean, considering it has Bela Lugosi as Dracula, and like you said, it's like he's like the most iconic Dracula you can think of in pop culture.
He is the Dracula, bar none, the Dracula.
I mean, the original movies. I mean, that's almost 100 years ago, but it's still so iconic after almost a century.
Yeah. I didn't realize how, it just clicked how old that movie is. It is 85 years old, that movie. At least.
Yeah.
I think the original Dracula came out, like, what, 31?
Yeah.
Something like that?
That's right. So it's it's about almost 95.
Yeah, it's a 95-year-old film, yeah.
Yeah, well. If I recall, I think this movie was a hit at the box office.
It was a hit at the box office. It wasn't the most successful Abbott and Costello horror movie. In fact, it was a successful one, but it wasn't the most successful one. Its direct sequel was Abbott and Costello Meet the Bride of Frankenstein. That was the most successful one out of the whole bunch.
I also forgot, there was also a cameo right at the very end of the movie.
Yes, there was.
Courtesy of Vincent Price as the Invisible Man. You don't see him at all. You just see him. You literally see a cigarette in the air.
You just see a cigarette in the air, which was probably done with a string and whatnot. And
Vincent Price actually reprised his role because back in 1940 he played the Invisible Man in a sequel to the original movie with Claude Rains, The Invisible Man Returns.
Yeah, and what's even more interesting is, in the original script, the Invisible Man was supposed to have a larger presence in the film, but they felt that it was a bit too much.
So next you know, they decided to do another movie with the Invisible Man.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and like I said, they did a whole string of Abbott and Costello meets insert monster here movies. You know, this was the first of a few of them.
If I recall, I think they did one with The Mummy too.
They sure did. And the Mummy was supposed to be in this one too. Like, it was supposed to be like the equivalent of the Avengers, basically.
Except it would be with all the Universal monsters.
Yeah. And, you know, I think a lot of people in the film industry agree that, you know, one of the greatest Universal monster fight scenes is in this movie between Wolfman, Dracula, and Frankenstein.
Yeah, I mean, it's not every day you get to see three monsters fighting at one time.
Yeah, it's one of the most iconic scenes in horror cinema history, if I remember correctly.
I mean, you literally see Dracula holding up a chair, keeping the Wolfman away from him.
Yeah, it's a hell of it's a heck of a sequence.
Yeah. Now, aside from being a box office hit, critics loved it too, if I recall.
Yeah.
In fact, the American Film Institute named it one of the top 100 greatest comedies.
Yes, I agree. I agree with that.
Yeah. So all in all, yeah, it's a shame that Abbott and Costello didn't last long, though. I mean, they were a good duo.
They were a good duo, but again, this was in their latter half. They started off like in the early 30s and then kept going into the early 50s. So this was kind of in their latter half, their sunset years, when they were waning in popularity. And slapstick comedy was starting to fade out in favor of more wittier comedies like with Dick Van Dyke and stuff like that.
Yeah, plus think about how long, compare all their movies compared to like how many like Bing Crosby and Bob Hope did. They only did like 7.
Yeah.
While with Laurel and Hardy, they did so many ever since like the 20s.
Yeah, and it's the same story here. And not only that, but Abbott and Costello also were doing radio skits. They were doing radio skits, and they were also doing short skit comedy as well. You know, stuff that would be fluff for the beginning of a larger picture.
Yeah. So all in all, what would you give this film?
I'm gonna give it a 3 out of 5. Now it's largely a decent film, but you can definitely tell that a lot of the sequences were sort of forced, especially the story itself. Like the movie itself is a fun to watch movie, but the story itself needs a lot of work, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It lacks context at the beginning. It moved kind of quickly, and there were some elements that were really funny, like Costello having two girls that really two beautiful women fawning over him at once, and then Abbott just going, "Am I chopped liver? What's going on here? Have you seen the guy?" So.
Yeah. Well, you may be giving it a 3 out of 5. I'm giving it a 3.5 out of 5.
Okay.
I mean, it is a good comedy. It would be nice to watch it maybe again, like around this time of year.
Yeah, so we're basically in the same mindset then.
Yeah. Now, yeah, I mean, this is definitely one of those movies you should at least watch, like, at least once during the Halloween season.
Or you know what? There's another great place that you can watch too, and we're gonna shout out one of Chicago's very own Svengoolie. Svengoolie features a lot of the Universal movies, including Abbott and Costello's movies.
Huh. I never knew that.
Oh yeah, Svengoolie is like real big in the horror movie scene for vintage horror movie films, and I know that Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein is a regular rerun for Svengoolie's Saturday nights specials.
So that was Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. Now we're going to head to the 1960s with a movie that a lot of you might not know. It's not really a horror comedy; it's more of a mystery comedy. But it features what was one of the most popular comedians of that time, Don Knotts. The movie, The Ghost and Mr. Chicken. A newspaper reporter spends a night in a presumed haunted house and swears there's a ghost in there. Next thing you know, he becomes a local celebrity, and meanwhile, the owner of the house tries to sue him for defamation to his family name because he thinks that there are no ghosts there.
Libel. That was the lawsuit. It was a libel lawsuit.
Yeah. Now, this is the first time I saw this movie, and I thought it was really good.
I thought it was alright.
And I know you said that you're a big fan of Don Knotts.
I am. I'm a fan of a lot of his later work. This one, I honestly was a little bit disappointed in because as you mentioned, I am a fan of Don Knotts. He's one of my favorite comedians. But this movie was kind of a bit underwhelming in my mind.
Really?
Mm-hmm. And the reason is actually because of the reason why this movie came to being. You see, back in the day, Don Knotts was just finishing out a season of the Andy Griffith Show. That's how he became such a big mega superstar.
It earned him many Emmys.
Was the Andy Griffith Show. But at the time, he wanted to do a little bit more. He wanted to do more feature-length films. He only had done one other feature-length film, and that was it. But he really wanted to do a feature-length film. And it was right after that season was wrapping up that he went to Andy Griffith and went, "Hey, I want to do a movie that's feature-length and kind of a horror comedy. What do you say?" And Andy Griffith's like, "Well, you can't really take off. You have a contract. You can't really take off for a season or something. Tell you what, why don't we, as a cast, come together and make this movie?" So a lot of the cast of this movie were recycled cast members from the Andy Griffith Show.
And not just that, I also found out that there were some from Bewitched.
Yeah, so it was a mostly in-house movie that was done with Don Knotts as the star because he wanted to be a star in the movie. And Andy Griffith helped out a lot with the screenplay. Now, I am going somewhere with this, with me saying I don't care for it. I've always felt that Andy Griffith was a little bit too lighthearted and a little bit too hokey. And it's pretty clear that a lot of the DNA from the Andy Griffith Show made it into this movie. Which is why I was a little bit disappointed. I thought it would be a little bit more slapstick and whatnot.
Well, I guess they wanted to not... I get what you're saying, but...
This was definitely a family-friendly horror comedy. This was definitely a family-friendly horror comedy.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to Don Knotts, I mean, you gotta admit, he did do a good job.
Fantastic job in his role.
I mean, when it comes to all the scenes where I mean, you can literally see how terrified he is in that house.
And not just terrified in the house, but in the beginning of the movie of how much of a loser he was.
Oh yeah, that's right. He's basically like the lowest guy in the newspaper department.
Yes, I think he's a typist, was it?
He was one of those guys that puts the letters
Yeah.
in the printing press.
Yeah, and it was it was definitely like, oh no, he is the loser, like going as far as to even having him drive a Ford Edsel.
I noticed that too, and the Edsel is considered one of the worst cars ever created.
Oh, it wasn't the worst car ever created. There's the Cybertruck, but it is one of the biggest automotive flops ever. On spec paper, the car was actually quite competent, but it was a complete flop because it had way too much flamboyant styling of the 50s. In the late 50s, a lot of car makers were actually moving away from that. Ford leaned into it too much and had to pull back immediately, and that's how we got things like the Ford Falcon and the Ford Meteor and stuff like that.
Wow. But still, it's really interesting seeing an Edsel in this movie.
Well, yeah, but that's just to drive the point home. Like, okay, so this movie came out in '66, right? Edsel had been dead for like 5+ years already. So at this point, it's safe to assume that the Edsel would be a loser's man's car. It's a used car that only a loser would own.
Yeah. And Don Knotts was basically the loser of the town. I mean, he's literally living in a boarding house.
Living in a boarding house when the supposed murder with the 2x4 happened, and ended up just being a guy drunk as a skunk and passed out.
And his wife was the one that hit him with the plank.
And he basically was laughed out of the TV station, and even laughed at the boarding house too a little bit.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to the other cast members too, they're pretty interesting too. I mean,
oh yeah.
You have the guy that's basically his superior in the newspaper department.
Mm-hmm.
He's the one that convinces him to go into the haunted house to see, because he thought that he would chicken. He literally bet that he would chicken out.
A 2-to-1. It was a 2-to-1 bet.
Yeah. And then you have his girlfriend who Don Knotts has a crush on.
Then you got Ollie, who was like his nemesis at the newspaper.
And then you have the janitor who used to be the gardener of the couple who used to own the haunted house.
And then of course you got Mr. Sampson, who is the plutocrat of the community, who is basically trying to get this house bulldozed.
And then you have those ladies that are all spiritual and they practically believe in ghosts 100%.
And doing these weird, quirky rituals.
Yeah. And then you have if there's one running gag I love in this movie, it was always that guy that was in the background you didn't see saying, "Attaboy, Lothar!" Yeah,
again, also was I think it was actually one of the directors of the movie that was doing that, or one of the screenwriters, and came from the Andy Griffith Show.
Yeah, that was a really...
They actually had to pay royalties to the Andy Griffith Show for him to do that.
Now, when it comes to the haunted house itself, I mean, considering this was made from Universal, you could tell it almost looks just like the one from Psycho.
I would argue it looks more like the one from the Munsters.
Huh.
In fact, I would even also surmise that it was in the same neighborhood as the Munsters. Fun fact, it actually was in the same neighborhood as the Munsters.
Really?
Oh yeah. Like in modern day Universal Studios, they literally have, because the movie it was done so well because it was actually a carryover from another film, another horror movie from the 40s, and Universal just had it around to use for people to have, like, hey, you want a spooky haunted house? Here you go, already done up. And it was phenomenal. Like the cobwebs and the organ with the fake blood on it, phenomenal. You could tell it looked like faded fake blood. It looked like faded blood that's been there for like 20 years.
Yeah. And then, and you also have like the classic things with hit haunted houses, like the bookcase that opens up to a secret passage.
Yeah, it's amazing. That was like the highlight of the movie for me, was the haunted house itself. And learning that it's currently sitting next to that same house that the Munsters were filmed in, so these two iconic horror movie houses are just right next to each other vibing, it was a delight to read that.
Funny thing I found out was when it comes to the guy who did the music for this film, he was responsible for the theme song of the Addams Family.
Oh yeah, like they did despite it being kind of done within a very very short time span. Like filming was only like what 18 days or something like that.
Are you kidding? Not even 3 weeks?
No, because it was between seasons of Andy Griffith. They were on a time crunch, beginning to end, in between the Andy Griffith seasons.
Yeah.
So the lull was only about, what, 3 months at most? So you gotta do screenwriting, pre-production, filming, post-production, and release in between 2 seasons of Andy Griffith Show.
Wow.
So, yeah, they were on a bit of a, that's why they were kind of like, that's why there were certain elements that were kind of a bit of a letdown, but they were also on a really extreme time crunch.
I don't blame them.
But, this being a sitcom cast, they're used to that kind of work pace. They're used to that really rigorous work pace.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to, let me see, what else is there to talk about? Oh yeah, the whole court scene.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you literally have Don Knotts' old grade teacher coming up and telling the...
Basically trying to discredit Don Knotts, trying to discredit the guy altogether by talking about how much of a coward or how much, wouldn't eat the crust on sandwiches.
He literally just grabbed the sandwich. He didn't cut the crust either.
No. How dare he? How dare he? Be a crust eater, alright? Eat crust like a normal human being, or at the very least, get a bread knife and cut the crust off.
I admit, when I was a little kid, I didn't enjoy crust on sandwiches.
Oh, no, I didn't either. I don't either.
But now I'm used to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then you also have the judge and the jury. I mean, they literally went into the haunted house with them.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, well, you'd have to watch it if you'd understand it. We're not giving spoilers. Now, overall, when it comes to this movie in general, I mean, I actually do like how modern it feels for that time. I mean, it was the mid-'60s.
Yeah, it was the mid-'60s.
I mean, plus, I mean, when it comes to location, the outdoor sets too, I mean, it definitely gives you that sense of, okay, this is a small town in the middle of America.
Yep.
I mean, the city
Rebecca, Kansas.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Although I found out it's actually not a real city.
No, but that's very common.
Yeah, that is true. I mean,
Fun fact, Petticoat Junction is also a big city. Sorry.
Yeah. Now, there's also the chemistry between Don Knotts and the girl.
Oh yeah, I thought that was a really interesting. I thought it was kind of interesting, but it did feel a little forced to me.
Well, what'd you expect? It's a classic movie where the guy gets the girl.
Yeah, that's true.
Basically the geeky guy gets the girl.
You put that back then, that was not done very often. Usually you have a much more heroic figure doing that.
Yeah.
Don Knotts.
Yeah, but when it comes to Don Knotts, I mean, think about all the comedy movies that he did after this. I mean, think about the ones he did with Disney. I mean,
not just Disney, but Hanna-Barbera as well.
Oh yeah, that's right. Oh yeah, that's right. He did his voice in some of those Scooby-Doo
He sure did.
cartoons.
In fact, one of his last voice acting roles was in a video game, of all things. Yeah, it made it that long. It was in the...
Up till the mid-2000s.
Yeah, well, by the mid-2000s, a lot of the lines were recycled.
Yeah, if I recall, one of his last film roles was in Disney's Chicken Little.
No kid, that late? Oh, wow, okay.
2005.
Wow, I thought he was, done by Y2K,
Yeah.
I thought he retired in the 90s.
Yeah, well, when it comes to Don Knotts, I mean, he was a treasure. I mean, now, if I recall, he has his own star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
Oh, yeah. And I think it was because of the Andy Griffith Show largely, too.
I mean, like I said, that earned him a lot of Emmys. I think it earned him 4 in a row, earned him at least 4, if I recall.
For a supporting cast member.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to The Ghost and Mr. Chicken, I mean, when it comes to the box office numbers, I think it at least was a success.
Yeah, they didn't really give too many figures for the kind of budget it had or how well it did in the box office. I think I did see, a budget of, something like 18 million or something like that. It was not much. For the time, it was not much money.
Yeah, well... Yeah, honestly, I think this should be a movie you should watch at least once during the Halloween season.
I would argue that it would be good for any kind of season. It's just one of those movies it's clean, family fun. like a lot of stuff from the 1960s.
Plus, it's Don Knotts at his classic comedic stuff.
Yeah, it's Don Knotts being Don Knotts.
So, all in all, what would you give this movie?
I'm going to give it the same rating I did the last one, 3.0.
I think I'm gonna give that too, because I didn't laugh as frankly I didn't laugh as much as I thought I would when it comes to this movie.
Yeah, like I liked a lot more of the. There were a lot of more elements that I liked in the movie, but I agree. It is just the movie was rushed, but once you realize how well it was done, I think for what it is, it was done very well.
Yeah, that I can agree with. I mean, it is an okay movie.
Yeah.
Although personally, when it comes to Don Knotts movies, I say one of my favorite of his is Herbie Goes to Monte Carlo from Disney.
I still liked him in his Hanna-Barbera stuff. I liked it when he was doing Disney and Hanna-Barbera stuff.
Yeah. So that was The Ghost and Mr. Chicken. Now we're going to head to 1974, 50 years ago, what is considered like one of the best horror comedies ever. And this was from one of the most popular screenwriters of that time, Mel Brooks.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this was the film that apparently it actually earned him and the star of the movie an Oscar nomination for Best Screenplay.
Now, who's that star, Chris?
Wisconsin's own Gene Wilder. Yeah, I am talking about the classic Young Frankenstein. The grandson of Frankenstein finds himself at his grandfather's old estate, and when he finds out that he can actually bring a monster to life like his grandfather did, he takes a whack at it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is one of the greatest comedies ever.
One of the greatest comedies, was basically served as a blueprint for what it was
Rocky Horror Picture Show?
No, I was going to say there is a subgenre of comedies.
Parodies?
Parodies, thank you. It served as a blueprint for future parodies. Even though it technically isn't a parody, because the story of Frankenstein was an open domain thing, so technically not a parody.
Yeah.
But definitely had a lot of those parody elements to it, where it's poking fun at itself.
I mean, think about all the parodies that he did after. History of the World Part 1, Spaceballs.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Not to mention, History of the World Part 2 just came out.
Oh yeah, that's right. The fact that Mel Brooks is still alive is such a miracle.
The fact that Mel Brooks is still going and doing new stuff is a miracle.
I mean, think about it. He literally did a whole musical based on the producers.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting because this was not a Mel Brooks movie initially. It was actually a Gene Wilder film initially.
That is true.
This was actually Gene Wilder's idea to do the movie, not Mel Brooks. But the two were working. How the story goes is the two of them were just wrapping with Blazing Saddles. And again, this is Gene Wilder's prime. In the same decade, you get Blazing Saddles, Young Frankenstein, and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
Well, Willy Wonka and the Charlie.
Charlie was the one with Johnny Depp.
Right. You're correct. So Gene Wilder's like in his prime. Like, if he can go up to a director and say, "I want this movie to be done," it would be done.
He was already nominated for his performance in Mel Brooks' The Producers, which earned Mel Brooks the Oscar for original screenplay.
Yeah. So like this was like Gene Wilder had made it and could do whatever he wanted, and Mel Brooks, same though, could do whatever they wanted, and the two had fantastic chemistry. But basically, how it went was that Gene Wilder wanted to do a Frankenstein movie. He went to Mel Brooks and said, "I want to do a Frankenstein movie." And Mel Brooks just went, "We don't need another Frankenstein movie. There's like 100 of them." It nearly put Universal out of bankruptcy. Nearly put them in bankruptcy again. Universal and bankruptcies, it's a common theme. But Gene Wilder's like, no. It just isn't just any Frankenstein movie. I want a Frankenstein movie where the grandson of Frankenstein doesn't want to be a Frankenstein and actually hates being a Frankenstein.
And instead calls himself Frankenstein.
And thinks of himself as something totally different and believes that anything his ancestors did was complete hokey and that they all belong in the loony bin.
That whole first sequence of him teaching that college course, and he's basically denying every single hypothesis that his grandfather had.
Going so far at, just getting really passionate about the whole
and
thing.
Literally shoving a pen into his
scalpel.
Oh, literally a scalpel into his thigh.
Yes, and just doesn't even know. Just
Class dismissed.
I think that was how he did it too. Is like
Yeah.
he casually crossed his legs to hide
Yeah.
it.
When it comes to the cast too, I mean, when it comes to Gene
such
Wilder,
a good cast.
I mean, you have the guy
Such
that.
a good cast.
You have Terry Garr, who I honestly found out just died today. God rest her.
Mm-hmm.
She was perfect as the assistant.
Yeah. Not to mention
The guy who played Igor.
Igor was amazing as well.
The way his eyes are popped out the whole time.
Well, not only that, but the hump moved occasionally, and he was the only character that broke the fourth wall at all. Which is actually Gene Wilder's one of Gene Wilder's biggest caveats for the film was he did not want Mel Brooks to be in the movie at all. Mel Brooks had a habit of featuring him, playing a role in the movie itself. And Gene Wilder's like, I will only do this movie if you don't do that because you have a horrible habit of breaking the fourth wall too well.
And that is true. I mean, Mel Brooks literally had an audio cameo in The Producers during that whole Springtime of Hitler sequence.
Exactly, and so the only element of the movie he is in as a German narrator in the beginning of the film, I believe.
Yeah.
In a small part. That's the only part he was in.
But then you have Madeline Kahn as his girlfriend, his fiancée.
Yes.
She's literally, right when he's leaving, she doesn't want him to touch it all. They're literally rubbing elbows. It's like something out of the, I swear, it's something that would happen a few years ago during the COVID pandemic.
What do you mean? It has happened. At least I've done it. I mean, we just did it now. And then let's not forget the housekeeper.
Cloris Leachman as Frau Blucher.
You're pausing just so you can put that noise animation.
Yes!
Okay, good. I think my mother would be very disappointed if you didn't put the horse sound effect. Okay? It doesn't have to be that one, just a horse sound effect, please.
I was planning on that the whole time.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
That makes my day.
And Cloris Leachman, God rest her, she was hysterical.
Oh, she was so good in that movie, especially when in the climax of the movie where she was like, yes, he was my boyfriend, and then there's lightning everywhere. It's like, this whole movie's a treat. It really is. Not for kids. Not for kids at all. I'm not going to repeat half the stories.
It may be rated PG, but I'm definitely giving this a strong PG-13.
Oh, I'm not even giving it that. There's so much implicit stuff that, if you were 13 years old, you have to go, Mommy and Daddy, what's rolling in the hay? And to all the parents out there who are now having children ask that, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to,
and that was one of the safer jokes.
And then you have other cast members, too. I mean, you have Gene Hackman as the blind man.
Oh,
that meets the monster.
Mm-hmm.
The monster played by Peter Boyle.
Peter Boyle, who is another, veteran in the movie scene.
You might recall him from the show, I think he was the father in Everybody Loves Raymond.
Yep, he was. In fact, a lot of people will say that he is the go-to Frankenstein, actually.
Really?
Because that's the most iconic one from from Gen X.
Oh yeah. Well, before that there was Boris Karloff.
Right, but Boris Karloff, of course, is the OG. But if you want to go, okay, who's second best? It'd be him. That
I can agree with. I mean that whole, and then you have Kenneth Mars, aka the guy who was the crazy Kraut in The Producers.
Yeah.
Playing the constable with the wooden arm.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to the way he keeps adjusting his arm is just.
It's great. It's great. Again, this whole movie is a treat. I own it on multiple. Movie mediums.
Yeah, and then you have, but then when it comes to the other things too, I mean, let me see what else is there.
Oh, the set design was amazing too.
Oh yeah, let's talk about that.
Oh yeah.
Apparently they used the original stuff from the original Frankenstein movie.
Yep, they did. And not only that, but it was just so well done. They even went out of their way to make it feel like a classic Universal horror movie. With the black and white and the set design and then film techniques. They actually were pulling stuff from the archives. Okay, how did they do it 30 years ago? We're going to do that. Just kind of add add to it a little bit to kind of give it that extra layer of poking fun at itself.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and then there's also those other things too, like the whole bookcase turning around from the candle, and he's
Put the candle back. Did I do it right?
yeah, and then you have Frau Blucher doing some crazy stuff. I mean, she's literally playing a violin to the monster.
Oh yeah. You know, again, she was extremely talented at the time. I remember PBS doing a cover piece on her
Yeah.
when she passed away. You know, because the range of acting she would do.
Yeah, and when it comes to the jokes, they are hysterical.
They're amazing. Again, I'm not repeating any of them.
50 years later, and they're still some of the funniest jokes I've heard in movies.
Exactly, it is. And some of the bits in that movie still hold up to this day. Like, if you look at a candle, like a bunch of candles on a wall, you can't help but think of the put the candle back line.
And then when it comes to that whole scene where you literally see G. Wilder and the monster dancing to Putting on the Ritz.
Yes. Yes, it's great.
It's like one of those things you're like, okay, what just happened?
Yep.
I mean, I can't imagine like Dracula or the Wolfman doing anything like that.
I mean, Michael J. Fox film.
Oh yeah, Teen Wolf.
So I mean,
Well, it's definitely not like Michael Jackson's Thriller, that's for sure.
No, it isn't. But again, that was kind of popular at the time.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, all that was within 10 years of one another.
Yeah. Now when it comes to this movie, it's just, man,
It's great.
it's just hilarious.
I like it.
No wonder it's called one of the best comedies ever.
One of the best films ever. It's in my top. It's like one of my favorite movies of all time.
And this was the same year as Mel Brooks' Blazing Saddles.
Oh yeah. Again, right off the coattails of that. Was literally riding on the success of Blazing Saddles.
Yeah, and I think it also would help make the movie a big hit at the box office. if I
Oh yes,
recall.
it did.
I found out that Cloris Leachman and Madeline Kahn were actually nominated for Golden Globes for their performances.
Mm-hmm.
Madeline Kahn was actually nominated for an Oscar that same year, but it was for Blazing Saddles.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when it comes to Young Frankenstein, it ended up getting 2 Oscar nominations: Best Adapted Screenplay and Best Sound.
Yes. And yeah, again, this sounds amazing. It is. I put, like, in terms of, like, what were the 2 best movies that had sound effects in the 1970s, I'd say Young Frankenstein and then Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
What about Star Wars?
Nope, Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Go nuts.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, of course, Star Wars. That's an easy answer. But if you're talking like 2 movies that are in their own element, and we're
More of
doing
the comedy area.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it's no wonder that the American Film Institute named this one of the top 100 funniest movies ever.
Oh yeah.
I think if I recall, they also did that rendition of Putting on the Ritz as their top 100 songs.
Yes, it's great. It's so great.
Yeah, and when it comes to Gene Wilder, God rest, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
for a guy from Wisconsin, he just kills it.
Oh, 100%. The passion he put into some of those lines as well.
I mean, you literally see him.
You could see him turning it down to 1 or 2 in the like more serious straight lines, and then just cranking it up to 11 and just.
I mean, that whole scene with him wanting to open the door. I mean, he's literally screaming at the top of his lungs.
Not to mention when he finally acknowledges that he is indeed a Frankenstein. You know, just full going on. You're just really pouring it into her.
Yeah,
It's great.
Yeah.
Even the hair is like perfect.
I mean,
like a crazed mad scientist. It's so good.
Yeah, well, it's also the sort of same hair he had when he did Willy Wonka.
Yeah. It's almost as if it's his hair.
Yeah. I actually found out something really interesting when it comes to Willy Wonka in general, when it comes to Gene Wilder.
Mm-hmm.
Gene Wilder was nominated for Best Supporting Actor for The Producers, but ironically he lost to a future co-star of Willy Wonka, Jack Albertson. So when it comes to that ending of Willy Wonka, when he's so pissed, he's like, "You stole my Oscar! You get nothing!"
Mm-hmm.
Gene Wilder, I wish I knew ya.
Okay, I think it's time for a rating.
I'm definitely giving this 4.5 out of 5.
Oh, I'm giving it 5. I'm giving it. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. I'm giving it 5. I own it on Laserdisc. I own it on VHS. I make a point of watching it at least once a year. It's so good.
Well, this is definitely one of my favorite Mel Brooks films. I also love The Producers and Spaceballs.
Oh yeah, it's like that era of comedy for me is my favorite era.
When it comes to Mel Brooks in general, my God, he's just a...
So good.
I actually found out that he did a musical of Young Frankenstein as well for stage.
Yep.
And just like, yeah, I mean, first one was producers, then Young Frankenstein.
You know, speaking of musicals.
Yeah, well, we'll get into that in a moment. But when it comes to Young Frankenstein, I mean, my God, I mean, there's literally a whole song of Frau Blocher singing about her girl, about the fact that she's his boyfriend.
Yes. It's so good. Go watch it. But wait until like you're like 16 or older, I would say. I think 16 is about the right age for watching this.
Yeah.
You don't want like a middle schooler watching this. No.
Yeah. Let me just say one more thing. Blur.
You are gonna have way too much. I'm glad I'm not the one editing this. I'm glad I'm not the one editing this.
So that was Young Frankenstein. Now for our last film, we're going to head to 1986 with a very unique, different kind. It's actually a musical.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually based on a B-movie that was released in the 1960s from the late Roger Corman.
1960.
Yeah, featuring a very young Jack Nicholson.
Yeah.
But this one, it has Rick Moranis in it.
And Steve Martin. And Bill Murray.
Yeah. I'm talking about the popular musical version of the film version of the popular off-Broadway musical Little Shop of Horrors. In the 1960s, a guy working at a flower shop finds a mysterious plant that only feeds on blood. And next you know, it keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and he wants to do it. The plant even comes alive and gives him the guy the opportunity to maybe make a name out of himself and maybe win the girl.
Mm-hmm.
Now, like I said, this is based on a musical that was off Broadway, and to this day it is still very popular. I honestly recall seeing a production of it right here at the high school when I was a kid.
Yeah, it's one of those movies where if you were into musicals, this is a must.
Considering the music is done by none other than two of the most popular musicians from Disney, Alan Menken and Howard Ashman.
Yep.
And those two guys were responsible for creating three of the most popular Disney films of that time: The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, and Aladdin.
Yeah, there's a lot of Renaissance DNA here. A lot of Disney Renaissance DNA in this movie.
Yeah, when it comes to Howard Ashman, God rest him, I mean, there's a whole documentary about him on Disney+.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely recommend that. And not only that, but Howard Ashman also not only did the book for the musical, he also wrote the script for the movie.
Oh yeah.
And the movie is actually directed by Frank Oz, who was a very popular puppeteer at that time. He was the guy that did Miss Piggy and Fozzie for the Muppets.
Yeah, so what we're trying to convey here is this is a superstar movie. This is definitely like a superstar movie where it's every single person that was casted and was behind the scenes was already in their prime.
And one of them was reprising their role from the off-Broadway production.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. With that in mind, let's talk about the main star, Rick Moranis as Seymour.
Mm-hmm.
And you can tell that he's a down-on-his-luck guy. He wants to get out of the city, and he wants to basically make a name of himself.
Wants to make a name of himself. Wants to get the girl. Wants the fame and money. Just.
He wants to, I mean, they literally call their area Skid Row.
Yes.
And then you have the girl, Audrey, played by Ellen Greene, who reprised her role from off-Broadway.
Yeah, and it's actually kind of interesting because she was actually one of the lesser known of the time, because they actually tried getting like Cyndi Lauper to be playing as Audrey and some other superstars, but most of them turned down the role. So they just went to so they already picked her off of Broadway.
Yeah, well, I think when it comes to the chemistry between her and Rick Moranis, I mean, they are wonderful.
It is a really, really good chemistry.
You also have Vincent Gardenia as the flower shop owner.
Fantastic.
He wants to help the two people basically make a better life. He wants his flower shop to be successful.
Right.
And then you have Steve Martin as Audrey's abusive boyfriend, who also happens to be a dentist and enjoys it because of how much pain he can give people.
Yeah, I believe the term is
sadist.
Sadist. He was a sadist. who hates masochists, by the way. Bill Murray was also a minor role as being a masochist.
Yeah, he's basically enjoying every bit of pain he has during an operation.
You know, and of course Steve Martin. Seeing a sadistic Steve Martin with black hair doing Elvis impressions.
In a complete dentist outfit.
With leather jacket on the...
Singing a song from the guys that did the music for Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah.
This is the same level as the villain songs that...
This movie is a fever dream is what it is.
And when it comes to the villain song too, it's up there with like what they did for like The Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast.
It's not my kind of music, to be fair. A lot of it's R&B based, which makes sense. Like the voice actor for the plant, for Audrey 2,
Levy Stubbs
was Levy Stubbs, who was a very famous Motown R&B singer and soul singer at the time.
Yeah, and then there's also a cameo by John Candy as a radio broadcaster.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the cast is just... And then you have the three girls who are basically the chorus.
Mm-hmm.
One of them has Tisha Campbell. You might recall her from the show My Wife and Kids.
Mm-hmm. You know, which again, a lot of that DNA. If you've seen Hercules, it's a very similar DNA pattern as well.
Yeah, they're basically like the muses from Disney's Hercules. Alan Menken even did the music for that.
Yeah. So again, it shows. I would say that this was basically the prelude of what Disney were to become.
Well, they were the ones that brought in Alan Menken and Howard Ashman because they wanted to bring like the classic Disney back, but with the modern Broadway flair.
Mm-hmm.
And then next you know they're getting Oscars for Beauty and the Beast and The Little Mermaid.
Right.
And of course Alan Menken would win again for Aladdin and Pocahontas.
Mm-hmm. Now, some criticisms I have about the movie. I've already mentioned one where I wasn't really too big of a fan of the music itself. Like, it was good music, not my genre of music. And the other criticism I have was how shoddily put together the set design was. Now, that's coming from a film critic standpoint. From a musical critic, it's pretty good. But
the whole set was actually built in a studio in England.
Yeah, so like when you're watching this movie, it's important to go into this movie thinking this is not a movie, this is a musical. Tried and true. I'd say it's about the same level of musical in terms of hokiness and like the amount of fun that you're gonna have as Grease. That's like my number one comparison to this movie is it's got very similar vibes to what Grease would have. Only the singing's way better. I'd say the singing's way better in Little Shop of Horrors than Grease.
Yeah, when it comes to that whole song Ellen Green sings about how she wants a better life. That was basically one of Howard Ashman's like fortes, doing that I Want song. It's basically what helped him make that song part of your world in The Little Mermaid.
I just like Steve Martin and
Bill Murray.
No, Bill Murray, not Bill Murray, the other main protagonist.
Rick Moranis.
I just like hearing Steve Martin and Rick Moranis singing. That I was surprised at. Steve Martin, yeah, he's done other things in musical realms as well.
If I recall, he did that movie Pennies from Heaven with Bernadette Peters.
Well, and he's also done like little diddles here and there as well. But Rick Moranis.
Mick Moranis.
I'm horrible with names. Rick Moranis, his singing was like, that kind of blew me away, if I'm going to be honest.
That whole song of him basically wanting the little plant to basically, he's like, what do you want from me? Blood? No. and he's like, okay, grow for me, here's some blood.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the plant, because it is some of the most amazing puppetry I have ever seen in a movie.
Oh yeah. I would say it was good. Like, I like the final sequences where the giant plant gets really extravagant and has multiple tiny little smaller heads and arms and everything. Like, it really felt animated and real. I thought was really good.
I actually found out they had to actually fast forward some of those. They had to actually like slow down the acting and fast forward it to make it look more natural because of how much movement they.
That was very common at the time. That was extremely common for puppeteering, but not just puppeteering, but other forms of like having animated objects. Like I know that Disney was very famous for doing that kind of thing.
Yeah. Now when it comes to But when it comes to Levy Stubbs as the plant, my God.
Oh, so good.
I mean-
That's probably my favorite part of the movie is the plant.
Yeah, I mean, it's just really something seeing all that how much puppeteering it took to make that one plant.
Not that there's just that one plant, but it's multiple puppets. Because you've got to imagine that as it got bigger, they had to do different.
I mean, all those different vines and all that stuff.
And it had to gradually get more extravagant throughout the whole movie.
Yeah.
Like, to illustrate that must have been a pain. It had to have been a pain.
Hey, it was worth it. It earned those guys it actually earned those guys an Oscar nomination for visual effects.
It did. Unfortunately, it never really won any major awards other than, I think, a Saturn Award.
Yeah, well, it lost the Oscar for visual effects to James Cameron's Aliens.
Understandable. I think that's a well-deserved W. I think that's a well-deserved L. I mean, out of all the movies to lose against, Alien would be one. Aliens would be a movie that, yeah, you're gonna get taken to lunch too.
Yeah, well, other than that, now let's also talk about the costumes. I mean, they're very authentic for like the 60s.
I think it's a little bit. I think it for some of the characters, sure, but for like the female actress, that was a bit too risque for what it was back then. Would have been in the 60s.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of it's exaggerated, but again, that's the musical way. A lot of musicals did exaggerate a lot of the set design
Plus, it's like,
and the costume design.
Plus, like I said, this is based off of a B movie, so...
Yes. By the way, I watched the B movie as well as this, because I actually prefer and I actually prefer the B movie. You know, but mainly because it's not a musical.
Yeah, well, now, along with that, there's also the ending, because there's actually two endings.
There is two endings, yes. I only saw the one. What was the other one?
The director's cut.
Now, I saw the one where building crashes down and, and all that.
There's actually two endings to the movie. One is the original theatrical ending where there's actually a happy ending.
Yes.
And then there's the director's cut that basically is more faithful to the original musical, where the plant actually wins.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. When they originally showed the original cut to test audiences, they didn't like the ending at all. I think one reason I hear is because none of the original cast members were there, like in the original Broadway show, where they had the cast actually come out and sing the song.
Yeah.
But so they had to scrap it all and redo the whole ending to make it more optimistic as well. And that. When it comes to endings, which one do you prefer?
I'm gonna go with. I'm gonna go with the theatrical one. No, I'm gonna go with the theatrical one, where it's them blowing up the building.
That's the director's cut.
I prefer the electrocution, because that's very much Ghostbuster-esque.
Oh, the theatrical ending.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I prefer that too, honestly. I mean, the director's cut version isn't bad.
No.
I mean, you could tell that they wanted to just go all out with that ending.
I believe there's even a scene that was cut where the plant was on top of the Empire State Building. Yeah, not Empire State Building, it's Statue of Liberty.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I know there's a Blu-ray out there that has both versions. So you can pick out which version you want, the original theatrical cut or the director's cut.
Yeah.
But other than that, when it comes to this movie, it was a success in the box office. It was even nominated for the Golden Globe for Best Musical or Comedy Motion Picture.
Yeah.
But it lost to Woody Allen's Hannah and Her Sisters.
Yeah.
And it also was nominated for 2 Oscars. Best Visual Effects, which it lost to Aliens, and also for Best Original Song, Mean Green Mother from Outer Space. The big villain song at the end.
Yeah. Which personally was my favorite song in the movie.
It was the first nomination that Alan Menken and Howard Ashman ever got in their careers.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, they would go on to win for The Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast. Alan Menken would win for Aladdin and Pocahontas.
Mm-hmm.
And he's still going to this day.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean, if I recall, he's going to be doing music for a Netflix animated movie called Spellbound with Rachel Zegler.
Yeah.
But Howard Ashman, God rest him, unfortunately he died just before Beauty and the Beast came out because of AIDS. because this was during the AIDS epidemic of that time. He was, and it was his partner that got the Oscar for him for the song of Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah. You know, overall, what would you rate this movie?
I'm definitely giving it 4 out of 5 because this is definitely one of my favorite musicals.
I'm going to be a bit cruel here. Chris already knew this going into this. He knows I don't like musicals. I'm giving it like a 2.5. But only because I also saw the original 1960 version. I would argue the 1960 version has just as good as special effects for the time, has equally as good story writing, also a pretty surprisingly solid cast, and it was just overall for a B movie, really good. Plus you get to see a young Jack Nicholson being a masochist, which is just a delight. You know, very much in character of the Jack Nicholson that we know now. And if I'm going to watch Little Shop of Horrors, I'm going to go for the 1960 version. So the 1960 version, I'm giving it a 3.5, but this version, I'm giving it 2.5.
Okay, well, honestly, I prefer the musical version because I'm a musical kind of guy.
It is. Yeah,
Plus, considering I grew up with the music from those guys in those Disney movies, I mean, those two are such an awesome duo.
Yeah, whereas I watched reruns on TV, so I got a lot of the old classic horror movie stuff. So
yeah. Now, I guess you can choose which version you want to watch. I mean, the original is in the public domain.
it is. You can even just pull it up on Wikipedia.
Yeah. All in all, that was our take. I hope you all had a nice Halloween. For our next episode, we're going to be paying tribute to 2 other great songwriters. And they were brothers, and they made some of the most, and they were really popular during the 60s and 70s. I mean, if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have had like some popular Disney movies of that time, like Mary Poppins. I'm talking about the late great Sherman brothers, Robert and Richard. Until then, I'm Chris Wired.
And I'm Jayden.
And thanks for watching another episode of Chris's Classic Cinema. Happy Halloween, everyone.
Boom.
And another thing,
Bye.
blur.